Okay, so everybody saw, right, we moved the paper due date. So you're going to have till Thursday to do that now. We're going to do the midterm exam on Tuesday. And once again, I might not be here, but everything else will be as normal. There is still going to be a vocab quiz this weekend, but the vocab terms for this quiz won't appear on the midterm, right? Because I figured that's not fair since I didn't give those to you on the sample sheet. So, you know, keep the vocab quiz for this time in mind for the final. But yeah, the terms won't appear on the midterm. And then after the exam, we're going to be going back to Yates. You're going to read a short excerpt from one of his essays, and this one's a doozy. So just be prepared to have some.
Take migraine meds beforehand. Got it.
Yeah, Paremica Silentia Lunae is, if you can tell by the Latin title, is a little bit batshit nuts. Yeah, so does anybody have any questions about any of the assignments? Okay, so one thing I do want to note before we get started, we're planning a research symposium for English majors, similar to the one that the history department did a couple weeks ago. The date we've set for it is Friday, April 22nd, and we're looking for submissions by April 1st. So if you've got a paper from a past course that you would like to present, please do submit. Like, one of the reasons we want to do this is to show you all off, right? Because you guys do some amazing work and we're really proud of you. And, you know, we want the rest of the campus, in particular upper admin, to see what kind of stuff y'all are doing. So you should receive a call for proposals in about a week, right? I think we're going to need proposals by April 1st, but yeah, please, you know, go through your old papers, and if there's something that you're really keen on that you would really like to present on, then please do think about submitting. All right, so let's get to the dead. Who wants to start?
Nope.
What's that?
I thought we were going to have quiz today. Okay.
Nope. I figured like the week before the exam and the paper, I'd give you a break.
I still enjoyed it just as much as when I read it the last time.
Okay.
And definitely a lot. I was able to catch on to the humor a little better in this time reading it.
Yeah, this is a story that, like most Joyce stories, it rereads really well. Like, I've been reading Joyce now for 25 years, and each time I read any of these stories, I'm always picking more stuff up. But The Dead in particular, I think, rewards a lot of careful rereading. Well, what kinds of things do you feel like you picked up? Like, you talk about like picking up more of the jokes and the humor, right? Like, what kinds of things did you notice this time around that you didn't before? You know, there's always a follow-up question.
I think it was maybe the banter at the dinner table that caught my eye a little better.
Okay.
Specifically, okay, maybe not at the dinner table, but the first time I read it for your other class, I didn't understand why Gabriel was giving the girl at the pantry the money.
Okay.
Yeah, like I thought it was just to be generous, but it was due to the awkwardness of the situation.
Yeah, to kind of cover over the awkward conversation. Here's a Christmas tip so that you'll stop talking to me, right? But I think that this is also important because, like, at the beginning and the end of the story, a coin has changed hands, right? Much as we've seen, kind of like connecting this to some of the other stories here, right? So he gives back a coin, or he gives a coin to Lily at the beginning of the story and gets one back from Freddie Malin's at the end. So I think that there is something, there's a connection here, particularly I think to 2 gallants, right? Where, Lily, who is a domestic servant, is getting back Corley's coin, right? And much as is happening kind of between Lenehan and Corley, Freddie Malins is also honoring a debt between men, right? So just as Corley honors his debt to Lenehan at the end of the story, Freddie Malins also honors his debt to Gabriel at the end of this story. What other kinds of things did you guys pick up on it? Like, were the things you had questions about?
I'm very sorry to say that it's not my favorite thing that I've ever read.
Okay, why not? What did you not like about it?
It's not that I didn't like it.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's fine. I found it humorous.
Okay.
It definitely.
Like, it's fine. It's okay. Yeah. All right.
It brightened my mood a little bit after I read it because I had just watched a very, very, very sad, heartbreaking video for my Spanish class that I now have to analyze.
Uh-huh.
So I read it after that.
Okay.
So it made me feel better.
Okay.
I mean, it reminded me a lot of something else that I've read in the past, and that might be my problem, that I can't remember what I read that it reminds me of. I mean, it's not bad. I think I liked it more towards the end. The beginning was a bit slow for me.
Uh-huh.
I think was where it got me. But I liked the humor in it. I liked Mr. Brown.
Okay.
I liked him a lot. He was very funny.
Mm-hmm.
He reminded me of my grandpa.
All right. I'm not sure what that says about your grandpa, but okay.
He's very funny, very.
Mm-hmm.
He's a people person.
Okay.
He likes being around people.
Okay, well, you said that the end of the story interested you more than the beginning, right?
Yes.
What was more interesting about the end? What happens at the end here that's interesting?
He gets. How do I want to say this politely? He has so Gabriel has ideas about what's going to happen when they get to the hotel room,
Yeah.
and he gets
Mhm.
blocked.
Exactly.
He
Yeah,
gets blocked
yeah,
by
yeah.
a very depressing downer.
Exactly. Yeah. Gabriel thinks that he and his wife are of the same mind here, right?
They're not.
He's, seeing all of these physical signals in her, her eyes dilated, her face flushed, things like that. These things that signal to him intense arousal. And he thinks that they're, hey, they've got a hotel room in the city, there's a babysitter with the kids, right? They've got the night. They're going to go back to that hotel room and have the best sex of their lives. And then
She dumps a bucket of ice down his pants.
Essentially, yeah. Yeah. That's metaphorically speaking, that is exactly what happens here, right? But it also leads to Gabriel's epiphany, right?
Yes.
It leads to Gabriel seeing himself and his wife both a little bit more clearly. And kind of understanding his motives for what they are, and also kind of for thinking through why he misread all of those signals, right? Because essentially, what does his wife reveal to him in those final moments? What does he learn about her?
That she had loved someone else.
Yeah, that she had loved someone else, and he had no friggin' idea, right?
He isn't the truest or the biggest love of her life.
And even if he is, there's this whole other life that she led before she met him that he knows nothing about, right? And has shown no interest in.
I think it speaks a lot to the idea or the notion that you never really know somebody, or you never really know all about them. He writes. I like the way Joyce writes.
Okay.
He writes in a very realistic manner to me. Like, I can feel what's happening. I can relate it to things I've seen, like especially at the dinner when they're actually sitting down to eat. And like the way he describes the serving, like the carving of the food, by the time you get done carving the first round of plates, you're already doing the second. It takes me back to those family dinners. It like, I feel like I'm there. I feel like I get immersed in it. So I really did enjoy that. And I think that's where he really started to get me in the story.
Okay. Yeah, okay, so yeah, the situation is immersive. Okay, sure. And I think the way Gabriel reacts very, very strongly to aesthetic sensations, right? Almost every time he's brought up against kind of some kind of sensory data, right? He kind of sits and has this like paragraph-long reverie about it. Even when he's just sitting at the window and thinking about how pleasantly cold the window pane feels, right? He's always getting lost in these sensory moments, right? Which I think is both, which I think is also one of the ways in which Joyce is making fun of this particular character. So I think we learn a lot about Gabriel in the physical description of him at the beginning of the story. If we look on page 178, can I get somebody to read that for us? Starting with, he was a stout, tallish young man.
He was a stout, tallish young man. The high color of his cheeks pushed upwards even to his forehead, where it scattered itself in a few formless patches of pale red. And on his hairless face there scintillated restlessly the polished lenses and the bright gilt rims of the glasses, which screened his delicate and restless eyes. His glossy black hair was parted in the middle and brushed in a long curve behind his ears, where it curled slightly beneath the groove left by his hat. I wish I could write like that.
Don't we all? So, if we look at this physical description of Gabriel here, right, what things stand out for us?
He's not a small man.
He's not small. No, he's a stout, tallish young man, right?
He looks sophisticated.
What makes him look sophisticated?
Maybe the glasses.
Okay.
The lack of red on his face means that not like lack of red, but like the pale red means he's not always out in the dirt all day working.
Yeah, he's exhausted from actually having to walk, right? But yeah, let's focus on the glasses here for a minute and the way the glasses are described, right? On his hairless face, there scintillated restlessly the polished lenses and the bright gilt rims of the glasses, which screened his delicate and restless eyes. So, what do the glasses essentially do for Gabriel? I mean, yeah, we all know what glasses are supposed to do, right? They're supposed to help you see, right? But what are they described as doing here?
They're screening him or protecting him from the outside.
Yes, exactly.
A lot like the, are they galoshes? Is that how you say that word?
Yeah, galoshes.
He's very, him and his wife differ there.
Mhm.
I noticed that was a big contrast because he really wanted to protect his shoes. He wanted to look a certain way. He wanted to keep that protection from the outside. And his wife didn't care.
Yeah, this whole kind of like theme of protection, right? We can actually kind of trace this through the rest of the collection as well. These kind of references to various kinds of what could politely call prophylactic, right? You know, from the French letters and counterparts to the various references to umbrellas and the galoshes and now also the glasses, right? All of these things that are supposed to protect you in some way from something, right?
And in the end, he doesn't really get protected.
Well, I mean, he does experience probably the most powerful prophylactic of all, right? You know, that his wife simply says no. And as you said, dumps that bucket of ice down his shorts. But I think the other thing to note here about the glasses is this notion of screening, right? What does that tell us then about the way Gabriel's looking at the world?
He's looking at it through one lens. He's not looking at it through a different perspective.
Yeah, he's always looking at it through lenses, right? The glasses are a kind of intermediary between himself and everything else.
Picturesque.
What's that?
Picturesque.
Yeah, good. The picturesque, for those of you who don't know, you're remembering this from Britlet too, I think,
Yep.
right? It's a common late 18th, early 19th century artistic trope. It's based on the idea of the sublime, right? These things that are kind of like so big and so impressive that you experience awe or terror when you witness them rather than, desire or pleasure. The picturesque is a way of kind of taming the sublime by putting it into a frame and making it a little easier to take, right? So you reduce the scope in order to make it a more pleasurable experience. But I think in addition to this actually kind of like making everything he sees picturesque, it's also kind of literally enacting for us the idea of aesthetic distancing. Because I think one thing that we notice about Gabriel's behavior at the party, right? What's his basic level of participation in the overall action of the party?
He dances when he's forced to, and he cuts up the food.
Yeah, he dances when he's forced to, he carves the goose, and he gives a little speech that his aunts want him to, right? But most of the time he's just standing on the sidelines watching, right? And, having these reveries about what he sees. And worrying about his speech as well, right? One thing that we note about Gabriel is that he is incredibly insecure. But there's one other thing that I want to point to in the physical description of Gabriel as well. There's another kind of pattern of language here. Young, formless, hairless face. What's the other kind of theme here in Gabriel's appearance?
Childlike.
Yeah, he's kind of boyish and childlike in his appearance, right? All right, he's about 40 years old, but he's not yet matured. And let's look at one of these aesthetic reveries. One of the important ones near the end of the story, right, when he's thinking about his life with Greta. Right? If we look on page 215. Is this it? No, this is not it. Never mind. Page 213, sorry. Can I get somebody to start reading from "She was walking on before him so lightly"?
She was walking on before him so lightly and so erect that he longed to run after her noiselessly, catch her by the shoulders and say something foolish and affectionate into her ear. She seemed to him so frail that he longed to defend her against something and then to be alone with her. Moments of their secret life together burst like stars upon his memory. A heliotrope envelope was lying beside his breakfast cup, and he was caressing it with his hand. Birds were twittering in the ivy, and the sunny web of the curtain was shimmering along the floor. He could not eat for happiness. They were standing on the crowded platform, and he was placing a ticket inside the warm palm of her glove. He was standing with her in the cold-looking grated window at a man making bottles in a roaring furnace. It was very cold. Her face, fragrant in the cold air, was quite close to his. And suddenly she called out to the man at the furnace.
Okay, so how is he remembering their life together? What do we get from these memories that he's imparting?
It's fun, it's happy, they're running through
Yeah.
tall grass fields, and beetles are playing in the background.
It's a good day sunshine, right? It's or I want to hold your hand or something, yeah. So something sweet. But is there any kind of coherent narrative in his memory of their life together?
No.
What are all of these things?
Fragments of moments.
Yeah, they're all fragments, right? They're all just these moments, and they're all kind of centered on a single aesthetic impression, right? You know, his memory of the color of an envelope, or the feel of a ticket pressed into the palm, or the heat of a furnace on a cold day, right? So yeah, so all of these memories are these kinds of like crystallized aesthetic fragments. Now, does this sound in any way familiar to any of you? If we think back to early in the semester.
That word always escapes me. But it's Dorian and how he looks, and he's so beautiful, but it's phony. It's a shell. It's
Uh-huh.
A facade.
yeah, a facade.
Although, like, these are real things that happened to Gabriel that he's felt real things about, though, right? I think it's not so much that his feelings are phony, right? I think it's that he overestimates the importance of the aesthetic and underestimates the importance of the emotional in his relationships here, right? So you might remember when we looked at Dorian Gray, I read you those bits of Walter Pater. From studies in the history of the Renaissance. And Pater promoted as a kind of artistic program, right, this idea of holding on to and crystallizing these fleeting aesthetic moments, right, these fleeting sensory pleasures, right? Since you can never experience, each time you experience something again, you're desensitized to it, right? What you need to do is try to hold on to these impressions and the original feelings that they gave you. And I think that that's a lot of what Gabriel is trying to do. The problem is, when he tries to do this, especially with his wife, right, he ends up kind of turning people into abstractions or into objects. Like if we look at page 210, when she's listening to this song, The Lass of Faucrim, that the tenor Bartle Darcy is singing. And he is transfixed by her. Right? Can I get somebody to read from He Stood Still in the Gloom of the Hall at the top of page 210?
He stood still in the gloom of the hall, trying to catch the air that the voice was singing and gazing at his wife. There was grace and mystery in her attitude, as if she were a symbol of something. He asked himself, what is a woman standing on the stairs in the shadow, listening to distant music, the symbol of? If he were a painter, he would paint her in that attitude. Her blue felt hat would show off the bronze of her hair against the darkness, and the dark panels of her skirt would show off the light ones. Distant music he would call the piece if he were a painter.
So what's weird about the way he's looking at his wife? Like, it's not weird for Gabriel. We've seen that it's kind of typical for him, right? But what's the thing that he's doing that strikes us as weird?
The same thing that we've been seeing throughout all the readings that we've done. She's not a person. She's described in parts.
Okay, yeah.
Sections.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, he is dividing her up into sections, right?
we don't get to really focus on her as a person, it's just different parts of her.
Mm-hmm.
Like in The Heart of Darkness, we saw the forehead in the black dress, or we just saw
Uh-huh.
like things like that. We don't get to see an actual person. In Araby, we saw a silhouette.
Okay.
We didn't see a person, we saw a silhouette and neckline.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of feel like we're going back to that theme of not a whole person, but objectifying somebody
Okay.
and breaking them down in parts and what parts look better to us.
Yeah, and I think that's actually probably relevant to the other thing he's trying to do here as well, right? So what's he imagining her as?
A painting.
Yeah, and like, have any of you ever taken like a drawing class or a painting class? No?
Not since like elementary school.
Okay, well, even when you were in school, did you have to draw human figures at all?
Yes.
And what's the first thing you have to do to learn how to draw a human figure?
How to look at somebody and break them down into parts.
Yeah, you got to break it down into a series of geometric shapes, right? So the first thing you have to do is turn that person that you're looking at into an abstraction, into a bunch of shapes, before you can make them into visual art, right? Before you can make them into a painting or a sculpture. So for Gabriel, this process of abstraction, right, is part of kind of imagining art that he doesn't make. So who does this actually kind of recall a little bit in this collection? Somebody who imagines art that he doesn't actually make.
Little Chandler.
Yeah, Gabriel is a lot like Little Chandler. He's a happier, more successful version of Little Chandler, right? But his imagination seems to operate more or less the same way, except that Gabriel is more kind of disdainful of his Irish heritage, right? More on that probably as we continue to discuss this. But otherwise, he's somebody who's kind of aesthetically theorizing, right? But who's not actually producing art, except in his own imagination. Now, there are a couple of other ways that this particular story culminates a lot of the themes that we've been looking at here, right? Did you notice anything unusual about the way people are coupled up in this story? How many couples do we have at the Mrs. Morgan's Christmas party?
There's his two aunts, Julia, and I can't remember the other name.
Okay.
There's Kate and Julia, right? But they're not a couple, right? Like how many actual married couples do we see?
There's not many. I think we only really see the one.
Yeah.
And even they get split up and don't really dance together.
Uh-huh.
That we see. I mean, we're told that they dance together, I think once or twice maybe. But it's just a bunch of singles. It's like a singles party. And then you have the one couple that shows up to serve food. Because they both ended up serving food.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Gabriel and Greta are the only couple at this party, right? In fact, what do we know about our hosts here, the Mrs. Morgan?
They're unmarried.
Yeah, they're all unmarried, right? We've got 3 unmarried women, right? How are they related to Gabriel?
Julia and Kate are his aunts, and then I think Mary Jane is his cousin.
Yes.
Everything?
That is all, yes, that is all correct. So this is a household of unmarried women who live independently, right? What do they do for a living?
They're all musically inclined. One of them sings, and the other two play the piano.
Yes, they are all musicians, right? Music was the main prop of the household.
Except for their older sister, Gabriel's mom.
Yes. Gabriel's mother was the only non-musical member of the family, apparently, right?
But they idolized her because she was intelligent.
Uh-huh.
And I think
Yeah.
Gabriel is kind of a mix of that because he has that artistic brain, but he also seems to be very intelligent. He, writes a column. He does reviews for books and things like that. So I think there's a crossover there.
And he's a teacher, right? So what he does for a living. He teaches in a college, which in the Irish context would be like a private secondary school, not a university. So and this is just kind of a side thing we're going to sit on for a second here, right? Is there any mention of Gabriel's father?
No.
No mention at all of Mr. Yeah, like really, like only in that, you know, he married Gabriel's mother. Right? She married Pat Conroy, who worked at, you know, the Port Authority, right? But that's the only real mention of Gabriel's father. There's no picture of him here. You know, there's no trace of his memory except his last name. Right, Gabriel's mother, right, the former Ellen Morgan, is here displayed in a picture with Gabriel's older brother, right? So, one thing that might be important to recognize here, right? Well, first off, what do we remember about anxieties about sexuality and marriage in turn of the 20th century Ireland from previous sessions? Why might it be significant that so many of the people at this party are single?
Syphilis?
Okay.
That's all I had to go, so I'll say it.
All right, there's always the syphilis problem, yes.
I feel like everyone being single kind of makes that worse.
Okay, yeah, I know that. What is Bartle Darcy's cold, really, right? I don't think syphilis gives you the sniffles, but I'm not a doctor, so. But what else? Like, if we think back to the last couple of stories we read, and think, do y'all remember anything about marriage rates and marriage practices in terms of the 20th century Ireland?
They married really old.
Yeah, people tended to marry late. And usually, if you had, you know, like a family with several sisters, odds were only one of them was going to get married. At least only one of them would get married and stay in Ireland, right? The others would either remain single or they'd emigrate. So it looks like Ellen, Gabriel's mother, is the one who got the dowry. While her younger sisters, who didn't, were obliged to make their own living, right? There's another thing that's going to why it's so important that this is a household full of women, though. When is this story set? At what time of the year?
Oh, Christmas.
Yeah. But it's not set on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day specifically. Do y'all know anything about Victorian Christmas practices and how long people continued celebrating Christmas?
Close to 12 days.
Yeah, that's that stupid Christmas Carol that just keeps going and going and going with John Denver and the Muppets and all that shit, right?
And we wish it would.
Yes, but it never does. Oh, well, it does, but just longer than it goes on longer than you'd like it to.
It never does. My uncle was born on Christmas. He sings Christmas carols every day of the year.
Boy, that
Yeah, interesting grandpa.
that's
No, that was my uncle. That was my uncle.
Oh, okay.
that sounds absolutely charming.
My family is special.
But so this is actually taking place at the end of the Christmas season, right? So the actual date on which this is taking place is January 6th. So January 6th, on the one hand, is important for Joyce studies, right? The Feast of Epiphany. Right? the date when the divinity of the Christ child is revealed to the three wise men. But it also has a specific Irish significance. January 6th was when it was called Nollaig Naman was celebrated. And Nollaig Naman in Irish means Women's Christmas. It's also in other parts of the British Isles, it's also sometimes referred to as Little Christmas. So Women's Christmas was a day on which men took on the household duties. Goose was traditionally served for dinner. And here we have Gabriel carving the goose for his aunts, right? And it's also a day in which women held parties. The other name for this holiday, Little Christmas, also refers to a figure in Irish set dancing, which is like similar to square dancing, in which the female partner takes the active role, right? The woman leads in a Little Christmas dance rather than the man. So this is probably also relevant to what's going on between Gabriel and Miss Ivers, right? But yeah, so what we have here, it's a women's Christmas celebration. And the failure with Greta is not Gabriel's only difficult interaction here with a woman, right? Where else do we see him having problematic conversations with women?
Greta and Miss Ivers.
Okay, with Lily and Miss Ivers as well, right?
He seems to have a decent enough interaction with, what's his name? Drunk guy's mom.
What's that?
Freddie.
Yeah, his
Mhm.
mom. That seems to be a pleasant interaction
Right.
for him, which is a rarity.
Well, mostly because she's just talking boring stuff, right? And he doesn't have to respond or listen really. The whole time he's sitting there talking with Mrs. Malins, he's getting hot under the collar about what happened with Miss Ivers, right? So yeah, he can have a reasonably pleasant conversation with Mrs. Malins because he doesn't really have to converse.
When he doesn't have to talk, it's fine.
But yeah, let's break these two encounters down here. Right? So with Lily, the caretaker's daughter, right? What happens there?
He tries to be casual conversation, asking, how school is, when she's going to get married.
Uh-huh.
And she snaps back because she doesn't like the whole marriage thing.
Yeah, I mean, she... on page 178, right? Oh, then, said Gabriel gaily, I suppose you'll be going to your wedding one of these fine days with a young man, eh? The girl glanced back at him over her shoulder and said with great bitterness, the men that is now is only all palaver and what they can get out of you. So, on the one hand, this fits with the larger theme of difficult romantic relationships and no marriages, right? What else does this seem like it might harken back to? What other story does this sound like it might harken back to a little bit? Who might she have had a run-in with? Pardon?
Two
Corey.
balance, yeah.
Yeah, she may have had a run-in with Corley or someone like him,
I
right?
don't know what names.
Yeah, so I think, there's that connection of men trying to sponge off of women between these two stories. And Gabriel gives her, and then the coin that Gabriel gives her is then another connection between those two. So he ends this unpleasant interaction largely by fleeing, right? Give her money, run away. Now then, what about what happens with Miss Ivers? This is a little bit more complicated. It's a longer interaction with someone who is his social and intellectual equal, right? So what happens with Miss Ivers?
She gives him a verbal beatdown. She pretty much verbally smacks him upside the head in front of everyone.
Over what? What is she upset about?
That he reviews books for, what's his name?
Something British newspaper.
She keeps calling him a West Brighton because his
Uh-huh.
political views, according to, or the newspaper he's writing for, is British synthetic, or
Yeah.
sympathetic.
He writes book reviews for the Daily Express, which was a pro-British paper. And yeah, she refers to him at the end of their interaction as a West Briton, right? So we remember maybe, I think we talked about this last time or the time before, what West Briton meant. So what is a West Briton? If you call someone a West Briton, what are you implying about them?
That they're a unionist.
Yeah, that they're a unionist, that they're someone who is culturally British, right?
It's an insult.
Yes, it's regarded by nationalists as an insult. And how can we tell, even before Miss Ivers opens her mouth, that she's probably a nationalist?
It's the way she's dressed, like her brooch or.
Yeah,
It's not a low-cut top.
yeah, she's dressed modestly so as not to emphasize sexuality, right? She does not wear a low-cut bodice. And she wears a brooch with a large Irish device. And then when she's leaving, she says goodbye in Irish, right? So Miss Ivers is probably a cultural and a political nationalist. And what does she want out of Gabriel? What does she want him to do?
To go on a trip to rural Ireland.
Yeah, she wants him to come to the Aran Islands with her and some others, right? Now, the Aran Islands, did we discuss this when we talked about Yeats? Did we talk about the Aran Islands at all?
We talked about how West Ireland is most island. That's about it.
Okay, yeah. I think we covered some of that with O'Madden Burke last time as well, right? The idea of the West, the rural West, as the authentic Ireland, right? So the Aran Islands are these three tiny little rocks in the North Atlantic. And they're about as far west as you can go and still be in Ireland, right? They're about as far west as you can go and still be in Europe. And at the time, they were still predominantly Irish-speaking, like monoglot Irish-speaking, people who only spoke Irish. And Dublin-based cultural nationalists tended to view Aran as this kind of site of pure Irishness, right? That was where you went to go and get in touch with your Irish roots. Yes?
Does he not want to go because he can't speak Irish?
Why would you say that?
Because he seems very adamant on going anywhere other than Ireland because he seems to know these other languages.
Uh-huh.
And when she says, but it's your home language,
Uh-huh.
he jumps out of it. He's
Sure.
like, no, let's not go there. Let's not talk about that. And then his wife really wants to go and he's like, no.
So yeah, I think there might actually be kind of two levels. This is working on two levels here. I think one of them might be that language level that you pointed out, right? But what have we already also noted that he's completely uninterested in?
Anything to do with outside country living.
Okay, well, that, right? But in regards to his wife, what is he completely uninterested in?
Her Irishness.
Her Irishness, and really anything about her before she met him, right? I mean, he's notably cold when Miss Ivers says, oh, Greta's from Connaught, right? She's from the West. He says, her people are, right? So he seems to want to deny that she has that background, right? Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, we see that too with when they're talking about Ellen, because she made offhand comments about Greta's Irishness and where she was from. So
she
maybe
calls
he
her
gets it from
country
his mother.
cute. Yeah. Yeah. So there's a kind of snobbery here, right? It kind of like we talked last time, I think, about this divide between the Dublin stereotype is the city person is the Jackeen, the little Jack, and the country stereotype, the Culchie. I actually did go and look this up where the etymology of Culchie is. And the two most convincing things that I read are like one, that it refers to agriculture. And the other, that it comes from an Irish phrase, Kul an chi. Chi means house, and I can't remember what the rest of the phrase means. So I'm afraid this probably isn't much help to you. So I apologize for that. But remind me to look that up again after class. But yeah, so he doesn't want to admit that he married a Culchie, right? He doesn't want her to be that. He'd rather her be this still image of lovely bronze hair and a blue skirt in a painting, listening to music. And the song that she's having this strong reaction to is an Irish folk song, right? That this guy, Michael Fury, she was in love with as a girl, used to sing to her. So she's responding there to something from her past that he doesn't understand. But when it comes to the language thing as well, when he says on page 189, right? Miss Ivers says to him, and haven't you your own language to keep in touch with? Irish, asked Miss Ivers. And Gabriel responds, well, said Gabriel, if it comes to that, Irish is not my language. Is he wrong?
Not really.
Yeah. I mean, most of the story invites us to laugh at Gabriel, right? And to see Gabriel as he sees himself in the mirror at the end. But I think that this is one point on which we're actually meant to take him seriously. I think that this is kind of sincerely felt here, especially given the way we've seen some of these organizations, like the Era Abu Society from last time, kind of mocked and parodied in the rest of the narrative, right? I'm not sure that we're supposed to take Miss Ivers' criticisms of Gabriel as an endorsement of this kind of literary revival style cultural nationalism. I think that Gabriel's situation here is actually a little bit more painted a little bit more sympathetically, which is, I think, one of the things that makes this scene work particularly well. Is this is at least one place in which he's out of his depth as usual, he's insecure as usual, but the grounds on which he's being attacked do actually seem a little bit unfair. Joyce himself wrote letters that were to other people that were kind of critical of the Gaelic leaders and the language movement and so on and so forth, arguing that all of these people really did was confuse the poor postmen by writing letters to each other and addressing them in Irish so that no one knew where they were supposed to go. So, what is Gabriel's plan to get back at Miss Ivers?
To alter the opening of the speech.
Yeah, he writes this is something that's less flattering to him, right? He changes the after dinner speech he's going to make to include a bit to speak to her specifically, right? If we look on page 192, can I get somebody to read the stuff that's in italics, starting with ladies and gentlemen?
Ladies and gentlemen, the generation which is now on the wane among us have had its faults, but for my part, I think it had certain qualities of hospitality, of humor, of humanity, which the new and very serious and hyper-educated generation that is growing up around us seems to me to lack.
Very good. That was one for Miss Ivers. What did he care that his aunts were only two ignorant old women? And he keeps coming back to this idea, right? That the people that he's speaking to, right, he regards as ignorant and uneducated, right? So I just want to kind of put a pin in that for a second and come back to it. But what is he essentially, what is he using as his justification for going after Miss Ivers in this way? Like, what's the basis of his argument about hospitality? What's he appealing to?
The fact that they're at a party.
Okay, yeah, they're at a party, right?
He wants to show that he does know what Ireland's all about, which
Yeah.
Miss Ivers had told everybody else at the party that he was a West Brit.
Yeah, it's like Linus coming out at the end of a Charlie Brown Christmas, right? And saying, "Sure, Charlie Brown, I know what Christmas is all about. Right? I know what Ireland's really about. Right? It's about the hospitality of the older generation, not about the cultural enthusiasms of Miss Ivers and her ilk, right? People his own age. Now, what's the ironic catch here? Yeah, he doesn't get to deliver his tirade to her, right? Because she leaves before dinner. So he still works it into the speech, but without satisfaction, right?
There's not as much gusto behind it.
Yeah. And it's ironic that he wants to praise Ireland in particular as the seat of hospitality, right? He develops this theme significantly when he gives the speech after dinner, when he has himself noted that he's sick to death of his own country. This is what makes us great. I'm just tired of it. We're so welcoming, but it sucks.
We all have syphilis.
So much syphilis. Really, really a lot of syphilis.
That's going to be my main thing for the rest
I know.
of the
I'm glad that that's what you were all taking away from all of this, is that there was a lot of syphilis in Ireland circa 1900. It's totally what I was going for. Just to give you an exam on syphilis rates in Ireland in 1905. There we go. But,
Sorry.
no, go ahead. No, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, it's a one-word answer. There was a lot.
A lot.
But yeah, I think maybe even kind of getting back to these kind of like difficult relationships, right? That this whole thing seems to be built around. Let's maybe look at some of the other male characters here as well, and their behavior, and the fact that none of them are paired up, right? Who are the other men that appear in the story?
There's Darcy.
Yeah, there's Bartle Darcy.
There's Freddie Malone, or Malone.
Freddie Malins, yep.
There's Mr. Brown.
There's Mr. Brown. And that's really it, right? It's funny that Mary Jane says, you know, that we're so short of ladies tonight when she comes out to bring people in to come dance, right? When what the party actually seems to be short on is gentlemen, or at least named gentlemen, right? And I think that the we're so short of ladies is also a joke about low Irish marriage rates. But let's take each of these three guys in turn and try to pick them apart a little bit here. What's Bartle Darcy like?
He's another musician.
Yep, he's a tenor, right?
He's quiet. He doesn't really seem to want attention brought to him.
Yep, and why not?
He has a cold.
Yes, he has a cold, so he's not in voice, right? And at the end, when Mary Jane scolds him for not singing for everyone, right? He responds kind of rudely. So it seems like he's a tenor, and he seems to be well regarded, but he is, like Gabriel, he's also really kind of insecure, right? He doesn't want anybody to hear him sing when he's got a cold, because he doesn't want them to form a bad impression of his voice, right? What about Freddie Malins?
He's a drunk.
Freddie Malins, yes, shows up screwed, right? Yes.
He reminds me a lot of the cartoons that you showed us in his description.
Yeah.
Almost like that's all I could see when I was reading the description of him was that cartoon, because it like fit very closely.
It described him as like a beta version of Gabriel.
Yeah. He's about Gabriel's height and build, right? And they're about the same age. They're both around 40. So yeah, so Freddie Malins is a kind of counterpart for Gabriel, right? Like, where Gabriel's life might have gone had he, say perhaps not married Greta. Had he, not been educated, right?
I think Joyce does that a lot with the Irish stereotype.
Uh-huh.
He has a lot of those characters.
Sure. Yeah, like the whole Farrington Little Chandler thing, right? That Farrington is kind of like what Little Chandler might end up as in 20 years, right? With all of those ambitions unsatisfied, right? Farrington, letting his kind of like, trying to sublimate his anger into thirst, right? I'm just going to slip off down to the pub for a drink during working hours, and that gives the middle finger to my boss, and also helps to slake some of that anger a little bit. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. This is again like a kind of culmination of a bigger theme. And what about Brown?
He's a self-entitled ladies man.
Okay. But is he a successful ladies man?
No, he reminds me a lot of some of the guys or the
Okay.
older gentlemen that come into the golf shop sometimes.
Uh-huh.
They like to flirt because they know that they're no longer successful ladies men.
Right, but yeah, I remember there was this one poor girl who she worked for Habitat. She used to live. She lived here for a couple of years, and then she moved away. But like everywhere she went, all of the old guys would hit on her. Mostly because she was kind of too nice to tell them to fuck off.
Yeah.
But yeah, Brown is kind of like that type of old who likes flirting with young women, right? Sure. Even if they don't return the compliments. Now, how else do we see him behaving?
He seems to be, he likes to drink and have fun, obviously, but he seems to have some sort of responsibility to him as well.
Okay.
Because I can't remember which of the sisters it is, but when Freddie gets there and goes over to Mr. Brown, she gives him a look, and he makes sure that he has a non-alcoholic drink.
Right. Gives him a fizzy drink and not a whiskey. While he continues to pour large whiskeys for himself, right?
He has some level of responsibility.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think, how else is Mr. Brown different from the other guests? How is he different from the other guests?
He's a lot older.
Well, the Mrs. Morgan, he's actually younger than the Mrs. Morgan are. Because they can remember old singers that he can, right? He says, oh, that's too far back for me. There's a very specific way that Brown is different from the others. Think about it in terms of religion, maybe.
Is he a Catholic?
Well,
Oh, I don't question the Pope's being right. I'm only a stupid old woman, and I wouldn't presume to do such a thing.
uh-huh.
I,
Yeah, that's right. Aunt Kate unconsciously making a joke about the doctrine of papal infallibility, right? But yeah, there's something, when they say Mr. Brown is of the other persuasion, what does that mean?
Jewish?
Yeah, Mr. Brown is Protestant. Now, yeah, there actually was a small Jewish community in Ireland, and they are culturally and historically important, but they were not many. In conflicts over national identity, they tended to get co-opted by one side or the other. Like there's a joke in Northern Ireland, where they're trying to ascertain a guy's political loyalties, and they ask him, it's like, are you a Catholic or a Protestant? He says, well, neither. I'm a Jew. And they ask, well, are you a Catholic Jew or a Protestant Jew? Because his actual religion doesn't matter. It's about political identity and cultural identification, right? But yeah, so Brown is a Protestant, and I think we get kind of some hint to his overall behavior and what the others think of him as everyone's leaving, and page 206, right? Brown is out there, Aunt Kate said Mary Jane. Brown is everywhere, said Aunt Kate, lowering her voice. Like, she's fed up with the guy, right? Mary Jane laughed at her tone, right? Really, she said archly, he is very attentive. He has been laid on here like the gas, said Aunt Kate in the same tone, all during the Christmas. And how does this maybe relate to the way we see Mr. Brown behave elsewhere in the story? What does he tend to do in conversations?
Be loud and boisterous, and he seems to enter other people's personal space.
Yeah, and he also frequently interrupts people, right? So when Gabriel's giving his speech, Brown interjects a couple of times. After Aunt Julia sings her song, he gets up in the manner of a showman and says, Miss Julia Morgan, my latest discovery, right? He's got to claim this for himself somehow, right?
He likes to be the center of the room.
Yeah, he likes to make himself the center of other people's admiration or attention.
Would one originally argue that may make him the only insecure man in the group, but actually he's very insecure?
Yeah,
because he can't be by himself.
Yeah, they're all insecure, right? All of the men in the story are particularly insecure. I think it's interesting too that Brown, the Protestant, is yoked together with Freddie Malin's the Irish stereotype, right? They seem to be buddies and they seem to be around each other all the time, right? And they seem to play off of one another. Almost like, there's a notion that, the Irish stereotype is dependent in some way on the English Protestant. And at the same time, the English Protestant defines himself against that Irish stereotype, right? At least that's how I would read that relationship in a cursory kind of way. But I think we're running short on time, and there are two things that I do kind of want to get to here. We could probably spend 3 or 4 sessions on this story. Like, I'm not going to do that to you because that would drive everyone nuts. But I want to focus for a second on Gabriel's actual epiphany here, right? If we look on page 219. Can I get somebody to read the paragraph at the bottom of the page that starts with Gabriel felt humiliated?
Gabriel felt humiliated by the failure of his irony, and by the evocation of this figure from the dead, a boy in the gasworks, while he had been full of memories of their secret life together, full of tenderness and joy and desire. She had been comparing him in her mind with another. A shameful consciousness of his own person assailed him. He saw himself as a ludicrous figure, acting as a penny boy for his aunts, a nervous, well-meaning sentimentalist, orating to vulgarians and idealizing his own clownish lusts. The pitiable, fatuous.
Fatuous.
Oh man, that's important.
Yeah. Fartuous is an interesting coinage here.
A fatuous fellow. He had caught a glimpse of in the mirror. Instinctively, he turned his back more to the light, lest she might see the shame that burned upon his forehead. I guess my dyslexia is showing up today.
So what is the realization about himself here that he comes to? What's the epiphany?
He's been seeing people wrong. Not just his wife, but other people as well.
His lens, his glasses are wrong.
Yeah, that image that he sees in the mirror of the little confused looking chubby guy, right? That's what he is.
That's why he avoids mirrors. Because he knows.
Right. Not because,
Subconsciously he knew.
Not because he's a vampire, right? Yeah. But yeah, that he, that all of his, his torturing himself over this speech, and all of these, deep aesthetic contemplative reveries that he goes into every time he has a sensory experience, right? That it's all ridiculous. And yeah, it's just, kind of distance, it's, putting more distance between himself and others, right? So the last thing I want to look at here, I just want to spend a minute here with the end of the story, like the last 2 paragraphs, which I feel like are worth reading and listening to in full, just because, they're friggin' beautiful. Right. Generous tears filled Gabriel's eyes. He had never felt like that himself towards any woman, but he knew that such a feeling must be love. The tears gathered more thickly in his eyes, and in the partial darkness he imagined he saw the form of a young man standing under a dripping tree. Other forms were near. His soul had approached that region where dwelled the vast hosts of the dead. He was conscious of, but could not apprehend, their wayward and flickering existence. His own identity was fading out into a gray, impalpable world. The solid world itself, which these dead had one time reared and lived in, was dissolving and dwindling. A few light taps upon the pane made him turn to the window. It had begun to snow again. He watched sleepily the flakes, silver and dark, falling obliquely against the lamplight. The time had come for him to set out on his journey westward. Yes, the newspapers were right. Snow was general all over Ireland. It was falling on every part of the dark central plain, on the treeless hills, falling softly upon the bog of Allen, and farther westward, softly falling into the dark, mutinous Shannon waves. It was falling, too, upon every part of the lonely churchyard, on the hill where Michael Fury lay buried. It lay thickly drifted on the crooked crosses and headstones, on the spears of the little gates, on the barren thorns. His soul swooned slowly as he heard the snow falling faintly through the universe, and faintly falling, like the descent of their last end, upon all the living and the dead. And you know, I'm just going to leave you with that.
I came up with an idea while we were reading it. When it says that he was looking at the dead in front of him, and he couldn't make anything of it, that's because he hasn't seen anything like that before, and he can't aesthetically process that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things he's recognizing here is that everything does fade and flicker out, right? That you can't just hold on to and crystallize these little aesthetic moments, because you know life does pass you by, right? That, you know, whatever you try to do to fix the world in place, time passes, people age, people die. And if you're just trying to hold on to these moments, then you're kind of missing out on the whole process. And you're not seeing, you know, the entire picture, say, of another person's life, right? Much as he is not seeing the whole picture of Greta's life. And I think there are kind of two ways we can read the whole journey westward thing, right? One is a kind of embrace of a broader Irish identity, something he's kept at a distance. And I think that the idea of snow being general all over Ireland, snow coming down in Dublin as well as in Michael Fury's Lonely Grave, kind of contributes to that kind of idea. But I think that, the journey westward, right? West is also the direction of the setting sun, right? East is the direction of birth, and west is the direction of death. And, Gabriel's 40, he's, entering midlife. So he is, kind of like leaving youth behind and beginning his own march toward death. I say getting more and more depressed as I turn 44 in a month. So, yeah. All right. Yates next time, right? So, I just realized that, this is a modern British literature course, and only one of the writers we've looked at so far was even born in England. Only Mina Lloyd.